name's Margalit Feuer, and I will be discussing the theme of guilt, and more specifically, guilt within Shakespeare's Macbeth. I'm currently enrolled in Dano's British Literature class, and in this class, we have discussed the ins and outs of Macbeth in depth. We have covered many of the major themes, but the one that has piqued my curiosity most is guilt. Upon realizing this, I began doing research, inquiring about the topic, and wrote down everything I knew. And now, here we are. Before we crack this topic wide open, I want to start at the beginning. Let's define guilt. Guilt is an emotion, a negative emotion. And now I'd like to define it. First, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, guilt is 1, the responsibility for a crime or for doing something bad or wrong, and 2, a bad feeling caused by knowing or thinking we have done something bad or wrong. Now, a more psychological definition that also applies more to Macbeth. This is that guilt is a feeling caused by tension between the ego and the superego when one falls below the standards set for oneself, or a remorseful awareness of having done something wrong. Really, guilt is caused by oneself. It's something that comes about when you feel you have done something wrong. It's when you feel the remorse. Someone else can tell you what you've done is wrong, and that may influence your perception of your decisions and actions, but if you don't feel what you did is wrong, then you will feel no guilt at all. For instance, if a student cheats on a test and comes home and feels a lot of guilt, that means that he understands that guilt is wrong. But if he feels nothing at all, that means that his moral compass is somewhat different. So it's a totally self-involved feeling, and I think that is very interesting. But why should I even be standing here talking about guilt? Well, first, we all feel guilt. To some extent, we all have that little voice inside of us that tells us we shouldn't have lied to our boss or maybe eaten those extra large fries. But there are lots of different types of guilt, and though they have varying intensities and effects, they're all still guilt. But there's also a reasoning behind this emotion. It's not just some senseless, fleeting sensation, but it has a purpose. Guilt tells us we did something wrong. If we transgress a type of code, whether it be moral, civil, familial, guilt will make sure we know we did so. The more you prize that code, the bigger the guilt will feel. It's a feeling that happens, and in its most extreme cases, it's hard to shake. It helps to make sure we do not do the same offense twice. So maybe it was adaptive for our ancestors to feel this guilt and not do the same stupid thing more than once. And guilt can most definitely be used for the better. It's important to recognize guilt when you are feeling it and understanding it. Misinterpreting it will just make it much harder to get away with. So I'm here to maybe pique your curiosity, maybe inform you, or maybe something very different. Guilt, a guilty conscience, can lead to all sorts of things. Usually it's just some remorse we feel. That's the everyday, I shouldn't have had that last piece of cheesecake. But what about the intense kind? The kind caused by maybe serial killing? Extreme guilt causes paranoia, and there's no escaping it. The thing you want most to do is to be rid of that dreadful feeling, but it's hard. The guilt just looms over you like a shadow. The worse the crime, the longer and the more intense the guilt is. People with this type of guilt often know what they did is wrong from external sources, say the law, but they need no other accuser aside from themselves. No matter how innocent they may plead, they know deep inside of them they are as guilty as can be. And the worst punishment does not come from a judge or a jury, but from that same little voice. Guilt is often repressed as well. People don't want to deal with it, so they ignore it and pretend it's not there. However, this repression is not healthy. This can actually lead to guilt resurfacing itself in unwanted and in uncontrollable ways. It kind of sneaks up on you, and by that time, you're really helpless to it. Here are some pictures that dramatize guilt. You can see that they're being overwhelmed by it. There's fingers pointing to it, and things like that. And there's more coming up, like these. Guilt proves that we are human. Humans are capable of higher values and thoughts, and guilt shows that that person originally had a standard. Maybe one they set for themselves, or maybe that was set by other things, but nonetheless, they kept to that code. This standard was broken. This shows they had a standard to uphold the whole time. Though this emotion is clearly negative and usually unwanted, it can show something in a pretty roundabout way positive about that person. Though they may have done something bad, at least they feel something about it. Those who feel nothing after doing something completely terrible are the ones to really fear. And if guilt does get to the point where it becomes like those people in the pictures and it does take over their lives, then you have a person very sorry for their deed. Though not at all am I excusing them from anything, it just shows that their apologies are genuine. Now that we've discussed guilt at length and we have seen why it matters, I want to look at the ultimate case study of guilt. And that case study is Macbeth, written by William Shakespeare in the early 1600s. And even back then, Shakespeare knew a thing or two about human psychology. Macbeth starts out as a loyal soldier in the Kingdom of Scotland under the crown of Duncan. But quickly things change. After being told by 3 witches that he'll be King of Scotland, he makes some fateful decisions. He kills Duncan, and after goes on a killing spree. He kills Banquo, one of the soldiers he fought alongside with, and several others. Macbeth does become king, but a hated one for certain. But of course, this is not the end of the tale for Macbeth and his wife Lady Macbeth, because they both end up dead. What made this play last generations and generations until I find it in my hands? It's not the murder, because there has been many, many murder books that have long been extinct. It's the psychology of Macbeth himself. If he were an insane maniac without any guilt, we would categorize him with the mentally ill and just put him away. But what makes his character so gripping is that he has a conscience. He feels guilt and he has remorse. He's more like us than we would like to admit, and it's scary. Now, I'd like to focus on Macbeth's evolution of guilt throughout the play. He is the ultimate guilt character at the beginning, but turns by the end into a man without emotion. First, we see Macbeth as a soldier who pretty aggressively fights for the loyalty to the British crown. Once the 3 witches come about and tell him that he'll be king, something snaps. Macbeth starts to feel guilt before taking any action at all. He feels guilt even for thinking of killing Duncan. As it says, "Is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee." He's already taken aback that he's hallucinating things and even thinking about killing. And despite his initial discomfort, Macbeth does kill Duncan, but immediately feels the consequences. He says, "But wherefore could I not pronounce Amen? I had most need of blessing and Amen stuck in my throat." And he also says, "Methought I heard a voice cry, 'Sleep no more. Macbeth does murder sleep. The innocent sleep.'" So he has a physical manifestation of guilt. He can't escape it right now. But the play moves on and his guilt fades. Macbeth is motivated by ambition and kills Banquo as well. Later that night, he is hosting a royal party, but something goes wrong. Macbeth feels the great magnitude of his decisions and starts seeing the ghost of Banquo. No one else can see this figure, though. Macbeth realizes how deep his guilt is. He says that, "Blood hath been shed ere now. I, the olden time, ere human statute, purge the grit gentle wheel. I, and since too, murders have been performed, too terrible for the ear. The time has been that the brains were out, the man would die, and there an end. But now they rise again with 20 moral murders on their crowns and push us from our stools. This is more strange than such a murder is." The guilt that he has is worse than any sentence anyone could have prescribed him. He says that he feels this guilt not only because the civil law was drawn up, but because he held to that law, and he broke that standard that he set for himself. Guilt comes out during this party essentially because Macbeth had repressed his guilt before. He paid attention to this little voice, but chose to ignore it. And then he crossed the line further by committing even more murders. This little voice came back to bite him at an unfortunate and at an uncontrollable way. In an uncontrollable way. At the end, Macbeth is killed and paraded around as a hated king. Overall, guilt didn't drive Macbeth's actions. It was his vaulting ambition and deep paranoia over his position. However, his guilt was always there. Macbeth may have had more of a conscience at the beginning when he was more pure, but it was always there. Macbeth just chose to ignore it. Had he listened to this guilt and undone his wrongdoings from the beginning, then he would not have died such a depressed man. Had he understood his guilt and listened to it, as the purpose of guilt is, then all of the decapitating and bloodshed could have been averted. Macbeth's guilt really proved that he still is a person, though. He's not totally deranged because he did feel remorse. He had some type of moral code, and that really what makes the play so grasping. He is a person, just like you and I, but is capable of doing all these things we would never even think of doing. But what about other experience of guilt? Certainly, people experience guilt in different ways, and even within the text itself, there are multiple case studies of guilt. Another character I would like to look at is Lady Macbeth. She has her own story, and one that's quite different in regards to guilt from her husband. She begins with an abnormally, especially for a woman, hard exterior. She is the one that convinces her husband to pursue his ambitions no matter the sacrifice. She seems heartless and free of guilt at the start, as if nothing could faze her, but even the strongest succumb to guilt. Towards the end, Macbeth starts sleep-talking, which marks her first signs of guilt, and it seems like she's on the brink of insanity. She even says, "Yet, who would have thought the old man to have so much blood in him?" It's overtaking her, and it's finally coming out. Then she dies, and even some speculate she killed herself because everything was overwhelming her. Her guilt was bottled up from inside of her for quite a while, all throughout the play, in fact. She shows no sign of a guilty conscience. However, at the end, it all comes out in a terrible way, possibly resulting in her own death. This again shows the effect of repression of guilt and the uncontrollability of guilt when it inevitably comes out. Two people, two different ways of expressing guilt, one sad fate. Through Macbeth, Shakespeare gives us a clear message on guilt. He clearly tells us that guilt is an enormous burden. Though different people can experience guilt differently, it's a huge load to carry. It's hard to go through life knowing you have done something terribly wrong. Shakespeare is also showing how guilt can lead to horrific circumstances. Macbeth has shown us a lot about guilt, but other artists have done the same. Let's listen to a couple clips of other artists and see their perspective on guilt. Here, I'm about to play a clip called "Jealous Guy" by John Lennon. And in this song, he's hurt a girl, but he's trying to justify his actions by saying that he's just a jealous guy.
I was dreaming of the past, and my heart was beating fast. I began to lose control. I began to lose control. I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry that I made you cry. Oh no, I didn't want to hurt you. I'm just a jealous guy. I was feeling insecure. You might not love me anymore.
Here, John Lennon is clearly feeling guilt for his actions. And now another clip. This one is "Yesterday" by the Beatles.
I'm not half the man I used to be. There's a shadow hanging over me. Oh, yesterday came suddenly. Why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say. I said something wrong. Now I long for yesterday. Yesterday, love was such an easy game to play. Now I need a place to hide away. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say. I he said something wrong. Now I long for yesterday.
In this song, the Beatles feel their guilt for their past. They wish they could go back to it. But they have their worries and their guilt looming over them from their decisions. But they know it's hard to get rid of guilt, so they just wish they had never made those wrong decisions at all. In conclusion, we've looked at guilt in depth. We've looked at its symptoms, the process, and how it can play out. We saw the role it took in Macbeth and saw that guilt really humanizes him, and it humanizes anyone in general. People need guilt to understand they've transgressed a civil or moral code, and so then it can be challenged appropriately. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed.